In 1994, a shepherd in southeastern Turkey noticed something strange in his field, a curved stone half buried in the dirt. It had been lying there for 11,000 years. What archaeologists eventually pulled out of that hill rewrote the story of civilization itself, because Göbekli Tepe is older than farming, older than writing, older than the wheel, older than pottery, older than the pyramids by 6,000 years. And it was built by people who, as far as we knew, weren't supposed to be able to build anything at all. To understand why this site is impossible, you first have to understand the rule it breaks. For 100 years, the story of civilization went like this. First, people learned to farm. Farming created surplus food. Surplus food let people settle in one place, build villages, and eventually raise temples and monuments. Agriculture came first. Everything else, settlement, religion, monuments, followed from it. That was the textbook order, and almost nobody questioned it. It made sense. You can't gather hundreds of people to haul stone if there's no food to feed them. You can't build a temple if everyone has to spend every waking hour hunting and foraging just to survive. Göbekli Tepe turns that order completely upside down, because when these pillars were raised, there was no farming here. No crops, no domesticated animals, no pottery, no metal, no writing. The people who built this were hunter-gatherers, and they built something that would have taken hundreds of people working together to complete. To really feel how strange this is, picture the world these people lived in. 11,500 years ago, the last ice age was only just releasing its grip. The planet had recently passed through a brutal cold snap that scientists call the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to near-glacial conditions that lasted over 1,000 years. There were no cities anywhere on Earth, no nations, no kings, no markets. The entire human species lived in small, mobile bands, following herds and seasons, carrying everything they owned. Nobody, anywhere, lived in what we would call a town. These were people whose technology was flint blades and wooden spears and fire. And in the middle of that world, a world with no writing to plan, no wheel to move loads, no metal to cut stone, no farms to feed a workforce, a group of them decided to quarry, carve, and raise monuments weighing as much as 10 tons each. That is the context. That is what makes this site feel almost impossible. So what did they build? Göbekli Tepe is a series of great circular and oval enclosures ringed by massive stone pillars. The largest pillars stand over 5 meters tall, taller than 2 people, and weigh as much as 10 tons each. The pillars are shaped like a capital T, and they aren't just plain slabs. Many of them are carved, and carved beautifully. Foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, wild birds, spiders, predators, and dangerous creatures, again and again. Some of the T-pillars have arms carved down their sides and hands meeting at the front, above a carved belt and loincloth, as if the pillar itself is a stylized human figure, not quite a person, something taller, more abstract, something more like a being standing in a ring with others of its kind. And these carvings were made with stone tools, no metal chisels, flint, worked patiently against limestone by people with an astonishing amount of skill and time. This wasn't an ordinary settlement. For a long time, no one thought anyone lived here at all. It looked like a place people traveled to, a gathering place, possibly the oldest temple ever found. Some of the carvings are stranger than others. One pillar, often called the vulture stone, shows a scene rather than a single animal. A vulture with outstretched wings, other creatures, and shapes that some researchers have tried to read as more than decoration, as a record of something, perhaps even the sky. That reading is speculative and heavily debated, and it's worth being clear about that. But the fact that 11,000-year-old hunter-gatherers were carving complex, deliberate scenes at all is remarkable on its own. Vultures appear again and again at the site. In many later cultures of the region, vultures were tied to death and the passage of the dead. Some archaeologists suspect Göbekli Tepe had a connection to death rituals, that these enclosures were, in some sense, about the boundary between the living and the dead. Headless human figures appear in some of the carvings. Fragments of human bone have been found, worked, and marked. We can see the imagery clearly. What it meant to the people who made it, we can only guess at. For decades, the hill was overlooked. In the 1960s, a survey team saw broken limestone slabs here and assumed it was a medieval cemetery. They noted it and moved on. Then, in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt read that old survey and decided to look for himself. He recognized immediately what the earlier team had missed. Those weren't medieval gravestones. The tops of the broken slabs were the tips of enormous prehistoric pillars, and the whole hill was artificial, built up layer by layer over thousands of years. Schmidt spent the rest of his life excavating it, and the deeper they dug, the more impossible the dates became. The oldest layers of Göbekli Tepe date to around 9,500 BC. Let that sit for a moment. That is roughly 11,500 years ago. To put it in perspective, line the monuments up on a timeline. The Great Pyramid of Giza is about 4,500 years old. Stonehenge around 5,000. The first cities of Sumer, the first writing, roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years old. Göbekli Tepe is 11,500 years old. It is older than every one of them, older than the pyramids by 6,000 years. The distance in time between Göbekli Tepe and the building of the pyramids is greater than the distance between the pyramids and us. These structures were already ancient before the first city, before the first written word, before the wheel had been invented anywhere on Earth. Which raises a question that's easy to skip past. How? Move a 10-ton block today and you'd reach for a crane or at least a truck and a team with steel tools. These people had none of that. No wheel, no pulleys, no draft animals trained to haul, no metal. The limestone had to be quarried from the bedrock using stone tools, then shaped, then moved, some of it hundreds of meters, and then raised upright and set into position, precisely in a ring. Experiments suggest it would have taken many dozens, probably hundreds, of people to move a single large pillar. And that's the part that loops back to the whole mystery. Hundreds of people gathered in one place, doing hard coordinated labor for weeks, in a world with no farms. Every one of those workers had to be fed by hunting and gathering alone, which tells you the gathering itself must have mattered enormously to them. Enough to solve the food problem somehow, just to keep building. Here is why this matters so much. The old model said farming came first and religion and monuments came later, once people had spare time and spare food. Göbekli Tepe suggests it may have been the other way around, that the desire to gather, to build something sacred, to come together in one place may have come first, and that farming may have followed to feed the crowds that kept returning to build. In other words, it may not have been farming that built civilization. It may have been the gathering, the belief. The monument came first and the fields came after. And here's the detail that makes that idea so striking. Some of the earliest domesticated wheat in the world has been traced to this exact region, just a short distance from the site. The timing is extraordinarily close. It's as if agriculture was born right here, right next to the monument, possibly because of it. Now, a fair warning, this interpretation, that ritual drove farming rather than the other way around, is the influential reading that made Göbekli Tepe famous. But it is debated. More recent work suggests people may have lived at or near the site after all, and that the relationship between gathering, building, and farming was messier than a clean, single cause. The honest position is that Göbekli Tepe complicated a story we thought was settled, not that it replaced it with a new certainty. But the strangest thing about Göbekli Tepe isn't how it was built, it's how it ended. At some point, the people who used this site did something almost no one expected. They buried it. Deliberately, they filled the enclosures in with rubble, soil, animal bones, and debris by hand, covering the pillars completely. That is a large part of why the site survived so intact for 11,000 years. It was sealed, packed away under the earth like something being put to rest. And nobody knows why. Was it to close the site? To retire it? To protect it? To hide it? Was each enclosure buried so a new one could be built on top? We have the act, recorded in the ground itself. We do not have the reason. And that is the pattern with almost everything about this place. We can see what they did. We often cannot say why. We don't know exactly what rituals happened here. We don't know what the carved animals meant, whether they were guardians, spirits, clan symbols, or something we have no word for. We don't fully know who these people were, how their society was organized, or how a scattered population of hunter-gatherers coordinated a project on this scale over centuries without any of the tools we think of as prerequisites for it. And Göbekli Tepe may not even be alone. Not far away, other sites from the same era are now being uncovered, Karahan Tepe among them, with their own pillars and their own carvings. This may not have been a single strange miracle on one hill. It may have been a whole culture we are only just beginning to find. Excavations continue. Only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered. Ground surveys suggest many more enclosures are still buried in the hill, unexcavated and unseen. Göbekli Tepe didn't just push back the date of the first monument, it challenged the order of the whole story, the idea that civilization begins with a full belly and a settled field. Here, on a bare hill in Anatolia, people with stone tools and no written language raised something enormous, something sacred, thousands of years before they were supposed to be capable of it. They carved beings into 10-ton stone. They gathered in their hundreds to build it, and then they buried it and vanished from the record. We are still digging it out of the ground, and every season it offers more questions than answers. If you want to see what happened when the great civilizations that came long after this one collapsed all at once, that's the story of the Bronze Age collapse. It's on the channel, and it's a good place to go next. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. There's a new story every week, and tell me in the comments, what do you think Göbekli Tepe was actually for? Nobody knows for certain, and I read every theory. Until then, this has been the centuries before.